my involvement in the Slutwalks began when I was 16. It was straight after this stuff had gone on in Toronto, where a policeman giving advice on safety to a load of female students told them if they didn't want to get raped, they better not dress like sluts. I saw that as a completely abhorrent thing to be said by law enforcement who are responsible for keeping you safe, especially in what we consider quite an advanced society that is very civilised and advocates gender equality. It's very clear that the word slut is not tied to your sexual behaviour or your perceived modesty. It is a slur used against women because women's behaviour and choices are inherently considered less valid than men's. It is a slur to denigrate women, their behaviour and their bodies, and I think it's absolutely right that women who choose to try and reclaim that have every right to do so and shouldn't be criticised for doing so.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to the organisers for inviting me here today as well. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. I understand you have these every week, so you're all familiar with the format. It's kind of all new for me, but let's begin. Now, the debate has started off with the presumption that feminism is synonymous with the best interests of women, and that's the kind of presumption that's there in all of the presentations that we've heard today. Now, slutwalks, I would argue, certainly harm women, but it doesn't harm feminism, and this is why. It's because the ideal of sexual autonomy and the glorification of sexual freedom fundamentally represents the ideal of feminism, but it is not always the ideal for women. Now, this debate helpfully highlights this contradiction within feminism, and if the motion today was that slutwalks harms women, I would be arguing for the proposition rather than the opposition. But the motion today is whether slutwalk harms the ideology of feminism. And in this case, I argue, and feminists must agree, that slutwalks are wholly consistent with the ideology of feminism. Now, feminism has really no sound basis on which to advocate against the objectification of women other than personal taste when it at the same time advocates sexual autonomy. Now, slutwalks, in other words, the glorification of sexual autonomy, is basically the natural consequence of the feminist ideal of sexual autonomy. And in order to argue in favour of the motion tonight, you have to be consistent as feminists and abandon feminism's core ideal of sexual autonomy. Now, the first issue I want to bring up is actually a sensitive one, and so I'm going to bring up a couple of points, and it's with regards to rape. And this is a sensitive topic, but this is one of the reasons that Slutwalk was established in order to raise these questions. So, the first is that nobody here, I hope, is ever arguing or ever going to seriously argue that rape is ever justified, regardless of what a person is wearing. That's not in question here. But you don't have to accept either that covering up will guarantee your safety or make you invincible to attacks. Nobody's saying that. However, what can be guaranteed is that embracing being sexually free or embracing the term of slut also does nothing to prevent you from such attacks as well. So what is the point of this? Now, claiming also is something else which often comes out in discussions of slutwalks, that we need to teach men not to rape. Now, this presumes that your average rapist is, an average rational man with whom you can actually reason to begin with. Rapists are criminals, and criminals usually commit crimes despite having been taught otherwise. Now, relying on the goodwill of criminals alone, instead of doing what you can to protect yourself, is like saying we shouldn't have to tell kids not to take sweets from strangers. We should just be teaching people not to kidnap. It's like saying we shouldn't have to lock our houses, we should just be telling people not to burgle. And this is not a matter of victim blaming. This is simply acknowledging that you cannot rely on the goodwill of those people that have criminal tendencies. I'll take them at the end if you don't mind. Now, the second point I'd like to raise is to do with sexual freedom. Now, slutwalks is not just about reclaiming a word. It's about feminism advocating the sexual freedom of women. Thus, the word slut is not equivalent, as is often claimed, and including it was claimed by the founder of slutwalks, it's not the equivalent of the word queer or gay. For example, example, one is attributed to the chosen behaviors of a person, whereas the other is attributed to the characteristics of the person. So they're not real equivalents. The real equivalent of the word slut becomes apparent when you consider that to actually advocate sexual freedom of women, as feminism does, is also to approve of the sexual freedom of men as well. So the real equivalent to slut, I would say, is the word womanizer. When men celebrate their sexual freedoms by sleeping around without care, commitment or responsibility, or generally being flirtatious in that way, they're often called womanizers. So should men now have parades dedicated to celebrating womanizing? I mean, you are, after all, they're just exercising their sexual freedoms. Would women be okay with that? I don't think so. But you see, slut walks make inherent sense for feminism's ideal of sexual freedom, but it doesn't actually make sense for the well-being of women themselves. Now, the third point I want to raise also relates to rape. And it's the contentious issue of consent. And everyone agrees that in a society, consent is a contentious issue with regards to, rape. Now, when feminism advocates sexual freedom, it opens up basically an anarchic situation in which people are basically interacting with each other without any rules of engagement, meaning that sexually free actually takes on a whole new meaning and ends up meaning sexually free to be exploited. Now, if you want the freedom of the jungle, you end up with the rules of the jungle as well, unfortunately, and you end up with serious social and legal problems with consent. For example, in August 2014, the now retired judge, Mary Jane Mowat, she explained that at trial, it is inevitable that it is one person's word against another, and the burden of proof is that you have to be sure before you convict. And that juries are often put into very difficult positions when the victim says they can't remember what happened, they can't remember whether they consented or not. And off the back of this, the judge said that rape conviction statistics will not improve until women stop getting drunk. Now, this is, Islam has a very clear system of establishing consent that deals with this unfair situation. And in addition to, for example, prohibiting alcohol altogether, in Islam there is no legitimate consent by men or women when it's outside of marriage. Now, the final area I want to turn to is that of sexual harassment generally, which is different from the topics of rape because it's a different context. Now, slut walks, like feminism, advocate again that women should be able to dress however they want, including attractively, so that they might attract the kind of attention that they want. But then they complain when they attract the attention that is undesirable to them, and then say that women shouldn't be judged by what they're wearing. Now, firstly, telling people not to judge or react to others by their physical appearance is like telling a doctor not to judge a condition based on the symptoms. Secondly, and finally, there's a lack of consistency here. For any woman that responds positively to sexual advances in the public sphere is approving sexual advances in the public sphere, including the undesirable ones, and like it or not, is implicitly justifying or facilitating the sexual harassment of other women. Now, short of men being psychic, there is no other real option here. So slut walks, I would argue, do not harm feminism. Slut walks are no more than the consistent advocacy of feminist ideals of sexual autonomy. And in order to argue in favour of the motion, you have to abandon feminism's core ideal of sexual autonomy. I would end with the advice to be consistent. Thank you so much for listening.
The options are proposition, opposition, and abstention. For a second. Thank you very much. If you would like to vote in opposition of the motion, please raise your hand now. And if you would like to vote in abstention of the motion, please raise your hand now. Thank you very much. So our committee will just be counting the votes, adding up the votes right now. And now to announce the results of today's debate. So in first place is opposition with 31 votes. In second place is proposition, narrowly with 22 votes. And abstention had 17 votes. So once again, we'd like to thank all speakers for coming today. Thank you all.
please.